All right, so now we've swallowed the food. So once we've swallowed the food, what happens to it next? Well, we're going to start in the esophagus. And the esophagus is this, we've got this mucosal membrane it's going to produce a lot of mucus to lubricate it. So we have a lot of mucus being produced here, these glands, these submucosal glands. And then we have a lot of very strong muscles that are going to force it down with those movements that we talked about before. And so this is all just about moving it down. Now these muscles are strong enough that even you can swallow if you're hanging upside down, right? You can swallow if you're lying in bed. So gravity, it helps, but it's not required. You can work against gravity here. And these muscles are going to push it down quickly, so it's not blocking that space, because as long as there's something in your esophagus, especially in your upper esophagus, that's sort of taking up space with the trachea. If you've ever sort of felt like there was something stuck in your throat, not blocking your breathing, but just like that stuck in your throat feeling, that's when something is lingering in your upper esophagus for too long. And it's going to pass all the way down this esophagus, past your lungs, past your diaphragm, and then end up in the stomach. Now the stomach is a giant muscular bag of acid. That's what the stomach is. So it's got all of these layers of muscle to churn this acid and pepsidase, the protein digestion enzymes together. Now the stomach mucosa are really specialized here, because the stomach mucosa have to protect your stomach from the acid and active pepsidase in the stomach bag. So to handle this, you have a very flat mucosa to expose minimum amount of space and a lot of mucus lining it. And then you'll have these gastric pits. And these gastric pits are where the digestive enzymes and the stomach acid are produced. We'll talk more about that in detail when we get into the actual digestion action as we go on. So, here's our gastric pit. We've got the smooth surface with the pits, the surface epithelium, then we've got these mucus neck cells that are going to produce a basic mucus. So it's a basic pH. It's going to protect the stomach. And we have chief cells down here that are going to produce the actual enzymes and the acid. So we've got this whole process from these gastric glands. So we've got these pepsidases that digest protein. And so then we need to protect the stomach from digesting itself. We have that mucus, and that's going to play a big role. That mucus is important two ways. One, it's just a blade of armor. You can digest the mucus, but you can't get to the actual epithelium. And the other important piece here is it's basic. So it's going to neutralize the acid and inactivate the pepsidase. So right along that very edge of the stomach is this very basic mucus that's going to prevent that digestion from occurring on the actual membranes itself. So that's the stomach. You've got this whole bag of acid and enzymes, lots of muscle, and then it's going to leave the stomach and go into the small intestine. The small intestine is where most of the absorption happens. And once again, we're going to talk about that in more detail as we go on. We've got the small intestine, and the small intestine is very, very tightly coiled. I know that we didn't get to do the full dissections in the rats, but I'm hoping you remember sort of getting to see that in the rats, and then you've seen that also in the online labs. You've seen this sort of tightly coiled intestine, and the food is just going to pass through this intestine, and as it goes, stuff will be digested by enzymes, and the enzymes are going to come primarily from the pancreas, and they're going to be helped out with the bile salts from the liver. Now, bile salts we talked about way back early on in lab when we were looking at enzymes and the activity of digestive enzymes. We'll talk about these again more as we get into digestion and absorption, but try to remember here what's going on with the pancreatic duct and the bile salts. And these are coming in at the duodenal ampulla. And so those enter at the duodenum, which is the start of the small intestine. And the small intestine is lined with this very distinctive mucosa with all of these villi. And these villi maximize surface space. So in the stomach, we were minimizing surface exposure. Here we're maximizing it so that there's as much surface area to absorb from all of this food that's going by as we can possibly have. So within one of these villi, we have, on the outside, we have cells that have even tinier villi, microvilli, that are lining them. And then inside the villus itself, we have a whole capillary bed and meshwork of capillaries and a lymphatic center, a lacteal lymphatic vessel, and these are going to collect the absorbed nutrients from the food in the small intestine. So as it passes through, there's lots of surface area to absorb. It's all going to go into these capillaries and these lymphatics. All right, so now we come out of the small intestine. At this point, you have absorbed all of the macronutrients, the proteins, the carbohydrates, and the fats that you're going to get out of your food. Now it goes into the large intestine. The large intestine is a bacterial vat. And this, here we've got the food is going to come in here at the cecum, go into the ascending colon, then the transverse colon, the descending colon, sigmoid colon, then finally go out through the rectum and then the anus. And we'll talk more about the role of this bacterial vat here, but this is important for a lot of purposes, but they include getting some of the vitamins out of your food and producing new vitamins. We'll talk more about this as we go on. And here is this little appendix. If you've known somebody with appendicitis, that's when this appendix right here becomes infected. So now we've passed all of this food through all of those parts of the colon, and it comes down to the rectum. And this is where food is actually going to pass, the waste at this point is going to pass through this rectum and then out through the anus. So the anus has the sphincter muscles. So these are circular muscles that are by default contracted. You have to act to open them up. So without an active thought to open them up, under normal circumstances, feces are not going to pass through the anus. Obviously, you know that. You don't think about keeping your anus contracted. But when you allow that to open up, feces can pass through. But they're not just going to pass through quickly. You have to put muscular pressure to push these out because these are dry, and you need to allow that, you push this actively out of this colon. Now, showing sort of these mucosa one more time, the large intestine is a little different. It looks in some ways a lot like the small intestine, but it doesn't have these villi sticking up. Instead, it has these deep crypts. Now, both the small intestine and the large intestine are going to have these crypts, but this makes the area smoother so that they're not being damaged by the feces as they start to dry out, but still allows the absorption of micronutrients and water. We reabsorb a lot of water in the large intestine. Now, when you become dehydrated, you try to absorb more and more water from that, and that can lead to constipation as the feces become too dry to comfortably pass out of the large intestine and through the anus. So that concludes our digestive anatomy presentation. We'll start on Wednesday with looking more at digestion and absorption and nutrients.